Right, a very good morning to everybody this morning. I hope you're all well on yet another Wednesday webinar. This week around, we are talking about the 2021 London Plan, and we're going to have Richard Bowman covering that for us. Just before we get going, we've just got a few slides to go through. Just as a reminder, guys, you will have come through MESHWORK, but for the benefit of those who are watching this as a recording, or you want to share the opportunities that MESHWORK has with any of your friends or colleagues, then feel free to do so. As you'll be well aware, it's a free platform. We're going to keep it that way for a long time to come. And we've got loads of fantastic stuff which we'll be telling you more and more about coming up. We're trying to invite more groups to the platform to get it growing, and also we'll be launching a sustainability essentially syllabus, which will have monthly topics and themes going forward for the rest of this year and into next year. So we're all busily beavering away, and we're really looking forward to being able to share more information, more webinars, more events with you guys, for making MESHWORK a great place to hang out. Just by way of a bit of etiquette, as you guys will be well aware, if you can keep your mics on mute to make sure that everybody's getting the most they can out of the webinar. Any questions that you've got, do feel free to put them in the chat box, and we'll answer them at the very end. And we are recording this webinar, again, for the benefit of those who have to drop off or are watching this in the middle of the night, who knows where in the world. And for, as I say, for the wider benefit of the sustainable design audience. So just a quick 30 seconds on Mesh Energy. If you're new to these webinars and you're new to what we do, we're an independent and holistic energy consultancy. We're based in the south of the UK, do projects across the UK into Europe, and have even done projects in the States. We are really here to offer independent and experienced advice on sustainability projects, working with wider design teams. So whether it's your first project or whether it's your 50th, we're here to help you make that as successful as possible and bring all the tools and techniques and experience that you need to really smash it out of the park and create some great stuff for your clients going forward. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Richard Bowman. If you've been on many of these webinars before, you'll know Richard's done a few of these webinars for us. This time around, he's going to share his expertise on the London Plan 2021. So over to you, Rich, and I'll let you go. We'll talk for maybe 40, 45 minutes, and then we'll do kind of 10 minutes of questions at the end. So over to you, Rich.
Thanks, Doug. So today's CPD, what I'm planning to do is put the plan into context, and I'll be as brief as possible as the importance of the plan and give a high-level summary of the policy areas. But my focus will be on what many of you are familiar with as being Chapter 5, which is sustainable design and construction. And after all that, hopefully there will be time for Q&A, because there's an awful lot to get through. So the London Plan is just over 10 years old. It was first issued the year after Building Regs 2010, with the aim of making London zero carbon by 2031, and to incorporate the legacy of the London Olympics. The 2011 edition is more concerned with the 3 pillars of sustainability. And then the plan was updated in 2016, the year after COP21 established the Paris Agreement of 2015. This was followed by amendments in 2017, at which point there was a significant shift in scope and areas of concern, and this established the current format of the plan today. The 2021 edition incorporates just over 1,500 changes, with the continued aim of making London zero carbon by 2050, and is very comprehensive in its scope. So from 2017, the plan really was no longer a simple planning policy, but now encompassed more aspects of the quality of London's built environment and the quality of life of its citizens. The draft consultation on proposed changes to the 2017 edition took place through over 100 stakeholder engagement events in a 3-month period. And now the plan acts as a fully integrated impact assessment that requires statements on air quality, whole life carbon, post-occupancy, and circular economy, in addition to the established energy statement. And for those of you familiar with BREEAM methodology, you may begin to notice similarities in the approach and the structure and the areas that it encompasses. So the 2021 edition of the plan follows the same aims, aspirations and structure of the 2017 edition. And in total, there are less policies. It's actually down from 102 to 102 from 117. However, the policies are set out in greater detail, and they've actually increased from 384 pages to 434. So it's a big read, but it is quite accessible. The reader should allow about 3 times the time when you start to read the supplemental documentation and supporting tools that are now provided by the GLA. Simply put, if climate change proceeds as projected and London's population and economy grow as expected, then London as an entity is going to be placed under great strain. But what the plan seeks to do is serve as a model for probably other high density population centres of any size in the UK. The image on the screen was generated by the National Trust a year or so ago and illustrates the current heat stress levels in the UK, which is closely aligned with UK water stress maps. But this image illustrates what they're projecting heat stress levels to be in the UK by 2050. And so to me, this strongly suggests we must reevaluate our built vernacular very rapidly and, you know, to continue to make our cities livable while levelling off carbon emissions. You might already be familiar with the aims of the plan and think, well, yeah, hey, nothing new here, or great, now we have some sort of firm direction on this and there are tools and methodologies to support this. So for example, you might be familiar with the sustainable infrastructure section, which was sort of formerly Chapter 5, which is probably the most applicable to sustainable building performance and design. Some aims I will explore in greater detail than others, as they may be concerned to your clients. Other areas I'll give a high level introduction to, but I will try and stick to the salient points really. And you'll start to notice recurring themes such as inclusivity and opportunity. So what is good growth? In a word, as far as the London plan is concerned, this is concerned with identity, whether an individual, community or city-wide level. So it encourages earlier engagement with stakeholders, making a positive contribution to the built environment, creating opportunity and reinforcing or enhancing neighbourhood legibility and permeability. So this making best use of land is really making the best use of the brownfield sites. It's worth checking out BREEAM new construction ecology sections on this. Prioritising areas with connectivity, promoting higher density development, and employing a design-led approach. It also includes understanding existing place value, making net gains in biodiversity, and enabling 80% of journeys to be sustainable and healthy and active. But they recognise the fact that creating a healthy city is a broad and complex issue. It's by no means limited to construction professionals. And so the plan really aspires to mental and physical health equality by taking a healthy streets approach to improve air quality and provide ever increasing access to green infrastructure. But it also includes healthy buildings that are daylit, don't overheat, are built tight and ventilate right. To deliver the homes people need, the plan is looking for more modern methods of construction, as well as introducing whole life carbon assessments, because it wants to reduce whole life carbon. So really, business as usual is not going to not much longer be good for business. The spatial planning side of the London Plan sets out employment and industrial opportunity zones, as well as addressing the need now for small startup, enterprise and home working, while still ensuring that housing is high quality and affordable. And the plan does define affordable, and it puts metrics against that. Increasing efficiency and resilience are primarily a balancing act in limiting and adapting to the consequences of climate change. So the primary aim is to be zero carbon by 2050. But our built environment needs to be designed to be adaptable and water efficient. And again, maybe like I said before, our vernacular needs a paradigm shift to mitigate overheating if we're not to rely on air conditioning for occupant thermal comfort, thereby raising embodied carbon, whole life carbon and operational energy. So the first section is spatial development. And like I said earlier, this is concerned with identity, but it's about creating that healthy city. What I'm going to do is just run through each opportunity area. Now, opportunity areas contain capacity for at least 5,000 additional jobs or 2,500 homes, or a combination of the two. And these spatial development patterns set out in opportunity areas are linked to public transport extensions, and they're expected to take about 15 years to mature their diverse tenure. And the numbers are big. For example, the Elizabeth line, 125,000 homes and 170,000 employment opportunities. When you start to look at Crossrail and the Crossrail South, there's another sort of 44,000 homes, 32,000 employment opportunities. These plans cover Bakerloo Line and Thames Link, looking around about 100,000 homes and 100,000 employment opportunities. And then the Thames Estuary and the Trams Triangle between Croydon and Wimbledon. And this is about 146,000 homes, 129,000 jobs. There's a lot of expansion. And then there's the Central Activity Zone, which we're most familiar with probably as being the West End, Canary Wharf, the City. And here they're allocating 85,000 homes and probably about 1/3 employment opportunities. And by my rough estimate, this equates to about 3.7 million square meters of housing and 4.5 million square meters of office space. So if anyone on the webinar today is aware of current market cost and value rates, it'd be good to let Doug know the value of this growth in the chat box by the end of the meeting, by the end of the CPD. Now, of course, this all impacts on the surrounding area. So London really is now becoming a 100-mile city. So the plan calls for collaboration with the surrounding local authorities. There's 130 across the region. And this is really a result of the Localism Act of 2011. And the reason for this is because the South East is home to about 1/3 of the UK population and is expected to grow by up to 20% over the next couple of decades, with house numbers increasing by 1/3. The CAS is seen as a distinct area in its own right, because it's a national and international destination for business, tourism, education, but it also has that same relationship when it comes to arts, culture, entertainment and its heritage. And because of this, the plan stipulates that the activity zone air quality should always be improved by every project that goes in. So it basically requires projects to take an air quality positive approach, which we'll come to later. The plan's also mindful of the fact that the CAS sits at the centre of a town centre network. London is traditionally seen as a a conglomerate of villages. And it encourages a town centre first approach so that they're sustainable, healthy and walkable. As that their intensification requires impact assessments to be undertaken as the role of town centres changes. Now, the plan expects town centre development to enhance vitality and viability while complementing the wider southeast. So it's not to be seen as in competition. And so strategic and local regeneration through local plans should involve town centre management, business, trade associations, neighbourhood forums, although one might go further and include health and education organisations in that discussion these days. And so strategic and local regeneration through local plans is quite extensive, so the stakeholder engagement becomes wider. Design section, I'm not going to dwell on design too long, although it's the linchpin in bringing all this together and materialising it in the built environment. But policy D1 is concerned with building typologies, urban form, structure of travel networks, blue and green infrastructure, noise, historic evolution, and especially the views across London. And the plan expects this to be supported through the local plan. So the key here is that you almost have like the national planning policy framework, and then you have the London plan, and then you have the local borough plans. And so there's this sort of hierarchy of strategic responsibility, if you like. And so what this means is that they're aiming to deliver good growth through good design. Policy D2 really requires that we design for future densities set out in local plans, keeping with the local character. But policy D3 I find particularly interesting as this requires a design-led approach in considering the form and layout, experience and quality and character of a development. So the plan is looking for more than how something looks or works, but also asks that we make this the best it can be through meaningful engagement and collaboration throughout the stakeholder network. And so the circular economy now sits alongside urban greening, inclusive spaces, and designing out crime, because these all become fundamental concerns. The delivery of good design suggests the submission of master plans and design codes supported by design and access statements that provide the maximum amount of appropriate detail at each stage. But what this is, the aim of this is to ensure that design quality is upheld throughout the project delivery process and avoids amendments at a later date. So there's a lot more focus on early engagement, robust concept design. And so this really encourages the whole design team to be involved in the development from the start to the finish. So that through analysis and development certainty, design scrutiny and quality, digital simulation, and technical evidence is maintained throughout. Policies D5 to D7 mean that there are no barriers to social inclusion interaction. As the Mayor sees inclusive design as indivisible from good design. And so there are minimum types of private residence internal floor area ranging from around about 40 to 140 meters squared for a 1 to 6 bedroom house, and a minimum amount of outdoor space, of which 10% has to be accessible. And the design has to provide dual aspect for improved daylight, views out, natural ventilation, flexible use, while reducing discomfort from noise pollution. Development plans also need to encourage and explore opportunities to create new public realm where appropriate and make a positive contribution without being too intrusive. So public realm needs to now be durable, sustainable, fit for purpose, and respond to the genus loci. And it also needs to introduce or enhance green infrastructure that mitigates any adverse microclimate conditions So you might want to have a look at Play Streets or the Dutch Woonurf approach as a point of reference. While proposals for tall buildings made in locations defined in the London Plan are available, they need to address their visual, functional, environmental and cumulative impact. The matter of basements is seen as a local borough issue, but the project scope must include studies on local ground conditions, flood risks, drainage impact, land and structural stability, production of the green infrastructure, archaeology and heritage assets, as well as considering neighbourhood amenity, light pollution, impact of noise, vibration and dust and so on. So it's not as simple as it used to be. As we've already heard, public health is addressed really through the plan through good growth and the spatial development patterns, but it also features in the economy, sustainable infrastructure and transport sections. It's further reinforced through policy D11 to 14 for obvious reasons really, but D11 is really concerned with fire, flood, weather, crime and terrorism. Policy D12, I think, these days is self-evidential and is concerned with appliance access, evacuation and methods of construction. D13 and 14 are interrelated in that the impact of existing and new noise and nuisance generating activities are to be mitigated to improve the local health and quality of life. Now, housing is quite a comprehensive section. The increase in housing supply is set out as 10-year targets and local development plans that must be met. This equates to about 40,000 homes per year on larger sites. And small sites of less than about 2,500 metres squared need to deliver 12,000 new homes per year. And these sites are really encouraged to mainly fall within PTAL 3 to 6. Zones for sustainable transport strategies. Alternatively, they also need to be within 800 metres of a station or town centre, and these are expected to play an important role in achieving these growth rates. And so boroughs are to identify opportunities for the meanwhile use of sites for housing as well, to make use of land while awaiting longer term development. When it comes to affordability, simply put, 50% of new homes in London to be affordable, and the plan does define affordable. It says affordable housing is socially rented, affordable rented and intermediate housing provided to eligible households whose needs are not met by the market. And eligibility is determined with regard to local incomes and local house prices. Now this, when it comes to major development proposals, then affordable housing needs to make up 35% of development, or if the development falls on public sector land or strategic industrial locations, then it needs to be 50% affordable. However, there is a fast track for mixed tenure for developments, but in that case, affordable housing needs to be 75% of the development. So affordable housing is seen as 30% low cost rented. There's 30% which will be intermediate products for generally affordable. And then affordable is designed or defined as households with a 60 to 90,000 pound income per annum. And the remaining 40% is determined by the borough, who publish monitoring information annually on this. The loss of existing housing needs to be replaced by new housing, existing or higher densities, with at least the equivalent or greater overall floor space. But demolition needs to be considered as last resort and has to be viability tested as part of the design process. So And then policy H9 stipulates that boroughs should promote efficient use of existing housing stock to reduce the number of vacant or under-occupied dwellings, particularly in the buy-to-leave market. The range of mixed and inclusive housing need and demand must meet that identified in the 2017 Strategic Housing Market Assessment. And this has to be backed up by robust evidence as well. Now, policy H11 surrounding build to rent requires that schemes need to be of at least 50 self-contained units. And these are held under covenant for at least 15 years with tenancies of at least 3 years. And they must have service charge certainty and be supported by the likes of on-site management for a recognised ombudsman scheme. H12 is to provide accommodation to care leavers, for parole, reablement, mental health, rough sleepers, and also domestic abuse and violence against women and girls. While H13 needs to provide at least 4,000 homes for small sites by 2029 that are affordable, accessible and inclusive, and include electric vehicle scooter charge for mobility. Policy H14 is really devolved to the boroughs. In their local plans, they need to identify the need and include a 10-year pitch target in their local plans. Policy H15 is to ensure the local and strategic need for student accommodation is addressed. And to follow the fast track route, 35% should be affordable student accommodation, and that increases to 50% on public land. Large-scale purpose-built shared living must contribute towards mixed and inclusive communities. And it has to have well-connected sustainable transport with communal facilities, on-site management, and must support a tenure of at least 3 months minimum. Social infrastructure, I won't dwell on it too long. It's concerned more with public realm that has sustainable transport links. It is identified and addressed through opportunity area planning frameworks, area action plans and development infrastructure funding studies and neighbourhood plans. But what it does look for is repurposing redundant infrastructure as other forms of social infrastructure. For example, you might have read about the Hackney School of Food recently in the architectural press, which is quite a delightful little project, really. But at the same time, the NHS, education, SEN, childcare, youth groups, sport clubs, criminal justice, emergent facilities are now all stakeholders in this, in providing accessible amenities now and in the future. And while policy S5 calls for secure sites justified by needs assessments, and it's there to maintain and promote and enhance networks for walking, cycling and other activities such as the Walk London network. It's also looking for public accessible conveniences and changing places that support people with profound and multiple learning disabilities or motor neuron disease, multiple sclerosis, as well as older people. And also boroughs are encouraged to support each other in sufficient provision of appropriate burial space, both within and outside their boroughs as well. So they're encouraged to collaborate a lot more on that. With regard to London's economy, the CAS is anticipating almost 60% employment growth in the next 20 years. They'll be anticipating 18% growth in inner London and 23% in outer London, which represents roughly 4.7 to 6.1 million square meters of office space. But the plan does require that all these aspirations require intensification. And so the provision of suitable business spaces to meet this demand is to be set out in local plans, but it also needs to provision for charities, voluntary and community organisations, social enterprise, creative performance and makerspace, and also disadvantaged startups. Land use is to adopt a strategic approach through local plans that services logistics, materials, utilities, sustainable transport functions, wholesale markets, emerging industries, enterprise and R&D. While office space really needs to be flexible, scalable, as well as support scientific and creative industries, and be affordable within defined circumstances as well. The heritage and cultural policies require that local boroughs, their development plans demonstrate clear understanding of the historical environment, and that Historic England are consulted so that the role of heritage in placemaking is always recognised and sympathetic. Development proposals in and around World Heritage sites and their settings to include buffer zones, and they need to conserve and promote and enhance what the plan calls the outstanding universal value, including the authenticity, the integrity and significance of their attributes, and to support their sort of management and ongoing protection without compromising on our ability to really appreciate them. And as anyone involved in tall building projects will be aware, development proposals should not harm, should seek to make a positive contribution to the characteristics and composition of the strategic views and their landmark elements. Development proposals need to avoid or minimise harm to significant archaeological assets and also be incorporated into the development where possible. Policies HC 5 to 7 are again enacted through local development plans. These are to promote or enhance new clusters and opportunity areas such as creative enterprise zones, or if in the central activity zone, look at extended opening hours, antisocial behaviour, noise pollution, health and well-being, and how they're managed, and how those areas are all supported by a convenient transport strategy that is integrated. Green infrastructure is defined as really the interconnected network of open green spaces that provide a range of ecosystem services. So green infrastructure is essentially creating a healthier environment, one property at a time really, through landscape projects that deliver a sustainable return on investment. The plan stipulates that greenbelt should be protected, and that metropolitan open land carries the same status as greenbelt. The plan also encourages that local development plans should facilitate access to open space from home by sustainable means. And this really equates to around about 5,000 steps to the nearest 60-hectare metropolitan park, but it's a bike ride of about 3.5 to 8 kilometres for 400-hectare regional parks, or about 30 minutes travel time in both cases, really. While district parks should need to be under 1.2 kilometres away from the development, and local parks and small parks or pocket parks need to be within 400 metres of a home. And when you read London's urban greening policy, it would appear to take Berlin's biotope area factor approach as a precedent. The BAF was formulated for inner city districts of Berlin, by experts who agreed on the necessary proportion of green space areas for different development types based on the layout of the buildings. And it covers everything from SUDs to rainwater runoff, green roofs, green walls, and so on and so forth. So what this means is, in essence, major development proposals must incorporate measures such as high quality landscaping, including trees, green roofs, green walls, and nature-based sustainable drainage as well. And so in relation to this, the plan protects sites of importance for nature conservation, as well as existing urban forest and woodland. And this should be reinforced through local development plan and local borough policy. Geodiversity actually is a fundamental cornerstone of our everyday lives. Geology obviously affects where we build, how we construct buildings, and how we deliver associated services. It might affect the size and scale of a ground source heat pump collector array, for example. And it influences the design and layout of infrastructure, filters the drinking water, and fundamentally underpins the landscape around us. And so regionally important geological sites are protected through local plans, as they also enhance biodiversity. Now, sustainable infrastructure. This policy is expansive, so I'll aim to focus on the important changes. It's best summed up as the provision of accountable, evidence-based design that seeks to close the performance gap. So design is about performance and not compliance. And when we say the performance gap, everybody is aware of sort of the S-curve relationship between, say, a Part L calculation of a project in design compared with post-occupancy evaluation studies, and you're looking at usually a fourfold difference between what's anticipated and what is actually happening. So projects will need to be at least air quality neutral, and there is air quality positive guidance. This was published in March this year. It relates to spatial development, design, green infrastructure, sustainable infrastructure, and the transport sections of the London Plan. You'll probably be familiar with the inverted triangle approach to minimising greenhouse gas emissions, part of the London Plan, and making energy statements. But the addition of the be seen on the right-hand side is subtle and important, as it's a feedback loop to inform future policy and also test the success of the policy as well. Essentially, it's now a requirement to monitor, verify and report on energy performance as part of the post-occupancy evaluation to raise awareness and understanding. And so the energy strategy needs to set out how this will be met in achieving zero carbon. Contextual data, for example, must anticipate and update be seen reporting throughout the RIBA plan of work, including planning, while building energy use and renewable energy use must do the same, but also report in post-occupancy as well. Energy storage, such as batteries, must report on capacity, but also the net flow to EV charging. And with regard to the plant, the building services, a breakdown of anticipated fuel use, energy system energy losses, and the import or export of heating and cooling from district heat networks must also report, as well as energy in use. And then finally, carbon emissions, shortfalls and offsetting are to be anticipated and reported on as well. So as a quick recap, major developments are to be better than building regulations Part L by more than 35%. However, residential projects are to achieve a comparable reduction of at least 10% through the B-lean stage. So fabric first approach first, followed by connecting to or providing clean communal or and district heat networks, of which there are many in London, before applying renewable technologies. Non-residential projects must achieve a comparable reduction of at least 15% through the B-lean fabric first approach. And also we see the first significant introduction in the plan of whole life carbon assessments. So whole life carbon assessments really do what they say on the tin. They're concerned with the embodied carbon contained in the extraction, processing, and assembly of materials on site. In addition, this includes the carbon arising from operations, whether it be possible water use, energy use displaced by renewable technology, end-of-life replacement cycles of plant, and maintenance and upkeep of the building. And then finally, the deconstruction of the building, which may lead to reuse, recycling, or downcycling of the assets or part thereof. But also projects are required to calculate operational energy as set out in RIBA 2030 Sustainable Outcomes. Version 2 has just been released. And this is aligned with the London Energy Transformation Initiative, GLA, UK GBC, and the Institute of Structural Engineers, and is essentially in sort of landing that 2050 trajectory. So the plan suggests that, can suggest really that BREEAM be used as a point of reference to demonstrate that energy efficiency targets have been met, and that we can expect to see BREEAM targets included in borough local plans. And so what this means is the plan also calls for dynamic overheating modelling. And so it'll be a requirement to carry out subsidy TM59 residential overheating analysis or TM52 non-domestic overheating analysis. The proposal for project for B-scene reporting must be completed 3 weeks post-planning. And that must set out a 5-year post-construction monitoring programme. The energy assessment guidance still applies, but it now includes a carbon emissions reporting spreadsheet, and that's available through the London Plan website. As well as there's carbon offset fund guidance from 2018, but that's mainly aimed at local authorities and sets out how carbon offset funds may actually be spent. The plan energy infrastructure policy requires the development of energy master plans that involves the boroughs, developers, as well as the energy companies. And this is to identify existing and required upgrades for energy centres, such as the one at the Olympic Park, or as well as energy storage and additional infrastructure. Major developments with proposals within heat network priority areas should have communal low temperature heating systems that are zero emission or secondary sources, or at least have ultra low NOx gas boilers. And there's plenty of good guidance on this in the CIBSE CP1 heat networks code of practice for heat supply in urban environments. The comfort and well-being through the mitigation of overheating cannot be understated enough, really. 6 years ago, researchers from Public Health England and the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine looked at projected population and climate increases, so they could estimate temperature-related deaths for the UK in coming decades. And without mitigation and adaptation measures by 2080, Public Health England estimates that there will be around about 12,000 heat-related deaths and 36,500 cold-related deaths in the UK annually. Compared with COVID aside, the typical 2,000 heat-related deaths and 41,000 cold-related deaths currently recorded at the moment. So with good design analysed against either CPC TM52 or TM59, passive design, appropriately placed thermal mass, MVHR and green infrastructure, we can get a long way to taking on this challenge and minimising the need for active cooling that raises carbon emissions. But don't discount free cooling, such as earth tubes, and other passive measures, maybe wind cowls, etc., etc. London consumes an average of 149 litres per person per day, which is 8 litres above the UK average. And so the plan requires that a scheme achieves at least the BREEAM Excellent standard for the WAT 01 water category or equivalent. And what this basically means, you've got to reduce potable water consumption by 50% against Part G building regulations, which means a significant change in mindset and how we, say, design our the sanitary fixtures and fittings in a residential setting, whether we continue to specify baths in the bathroom, for example. Policy S17 requires a circular economy statement on how materials will be reused, recycled or downcycled at end of life, as well as reducing the material demand in the design in the first place. And when you read this policy, it's worth referencing the BREEAM new construction waste methodology to capture waste management as to how it'll be monitored and reported, as the plan expects 95% recovery, reuse or recycling. And the reason for this is that to manage London's waste sustainably, London is aiming for 100% of its waste to be managed within London itself under policy S18 and 19. To be brief, aggregates need to be recycled wherever possible, with developments to make provision for the maintenance of a land bank, which is effectively 7 years supply of aggregate raw material of at least 5 million tonnes up to 2041. Fracking is to be refused. The policy is a little bit longer than that in print, but that's effectively it. And for policies SI12 and SI13, CIRIA is a great source on sustainable water management design when you're looking at SUDs and so on and so forth. Well, S14 to S15 and really 16 and 17 as well sets out policies surrounding London waterways as multifunctional assets that require the boroughs to establish joint area-based strategies. The plan recognises the shortage of long and short stay moorings, and so it's looking for the maintenance and restoration of the Thames Path and towpaths as sustainable transport corridors. And so that enables engagement with blue infrastructure for cultural and leisure purposes, as well as being an educational resource. When it comes to transport, it's anticipated and it's quite noticeable if you only go to London once in a blue moon, that there will be a citywide shift from 63% to 80% of journeys being made by walking, cycling, and public transport. And so the plan recognises that streets need to become more healthy. And so in the wider context, transport connections with the southeast and at a national level are already undergoing expansion. And so development plans and development decisions to ensure the provision of sufficient and suitably located land for the development of the current and expanded public and active transport system to serve London's need. And so as a result, the Healthy Streets Initiative and active travel approach sets out indicative transport schemes in the plan running from 2017 through to 2041 for all the boroughs in London to improve capacity, connectivity, and quality. What this means is the GLA require a transport infrastructure impact assessment that embeds the Healthy Streets approach within the vicinity of a new development. And this needs to include travel plans, parking design, management plans, construction logistics and delivery, as well as servicing plans of the development post-completion. And all this has to be done with regard to the Transport for London guidance so that it contributes positively to the intent and aspirations of the plan. Car-free should be the starting point for all development proposals if they're within the higher PTAL zones, and EV infrastructure is to be provided without affecting pedestrianisation. While residential parking spaces are according to PTAL levels, and whether the development is situated in outer or inner London, these typically range between 1.5 to 1.5 to 0.75 spaces per unit. Inner London is to have offices be car parking free, while outer London parking spaces are determined by the gross internal floor area. So in the opportunity areas, for example, it's 1 space per 600 square meters of GIFA. Otherwise, it's 1 per 100 square meters or 1 per 50 square meters in local development plan locations. But there is flexibility for EV parking. Likewise, retail parking is determined for OAs as 1 for every 75 square meters. But that same ratio applies, but only for developments greater than 500 meters squared, and needs to be captured in local development plan locations. Hotels in the central activity zone or PTAL 4 to 6 are set allowances for disabled, taxis and operational parking, while PTAL 0 to 3 is on a case-by-case basis. But typically, disabled parking needs to be 2 to 6% of the total number of parking spaces allocated in the development. In essence, policy T7 is calling for safe, sustainable, considered just-in-time freight movements that are set out in project logistics planning. While aviation policy, in its simplest form, is primarily concerned with what is best for London. So the plan requires the environmental, health and infrastructure impacts across and through London of aviation projects are fully understood. They need to be assessed and demonstrate that there's no other alternative, and that the project will actually fund the additional access infrastructure required, typically through the mayoral community infrastructure levy. So as I said right back at the beginning, the numbers are big. In terms of funding, 4.8 billion has been secured to support 116,000 homes. These are affordable, and that will start next year. but 2.8 billion is required per year thereafter to address the ongoing affordable housing need. The transport infrastructure requires 3.3 billion pounds per year. Whereas schools require 11 billion pounds up to 2050 for new primary and secondary schools, with an additional 12 billion required to renew the existing education facilities. 4.8 billion needs to be spent on existing health infrastructure to keep it operationally functional. Plus, there needs to be an additional 2.1 billion on top of that to transform London's NHS to support its continued growth. Pre-COVID, the required digital infrastructure spend was anticipated to be 8 billion by 2050, while the circular economy is expected to have a net benefit of 7 billion pounds over the next 15 years. And although London's cultural infrastructure is worth about 47 billion pounds, cultural space is in decline. 35% of affordable creative space, 35% of music venues, and 58% of nighttime venues will probably have been lost, as well as 25% of pubs. And there is a policy in the London plan that protects public houses. And finally, the KPIs. What the plan is looking for really is the supply of 60,000 new homes per year by 2029. And there needs to be the continued supply of affordable homes and a broad range of employment accommodation, whether that be work from home, startup, or kind of office space we're already familiar with. Need to protect and enhance green infrastructure and biodiversity. Looking for more than 35% reduction in CO2 emissions against the current building regulations. And that we need to increase the share of sustainable transport by 80% in 20 years that facilitates daily active travel. We must meet air quality neutral standards for emissions. And there must be a positive trend in the reduction of harm to heritage assets, and no net loss in cultural facilities either. So really, to wrap up, in the context of the London plan, where can MESH help really? So really, up to stage 3, we complete passive design and whole life carbon analysis. We provide the necessary energy calculations, fabric first optimization, and feasibility design to satisfy the lean, clean, and green approach. But crucially, I think these days we design to perform and not just comply. And that's important for London plan design and sustainable infrastructure. Stage 4, MESH provide detailed M&E design and specification packages to be seen, along with installer recommendations specific to your project. And while at stage 5, we typically provide tender return reviews and installation oversight. And at stage 7, we can carry out post-occupancy evaluation. So in simple terms, MESH services and scope of work typically cover about a third of the London plan, and about 40% of BREEAM credits. And so throughout, really, we're aiming to deliver a successful, sustainable project. And really, that brings me to the end. So thank you for listening, and hopefully we still have time for questions.
Yeah, we got. Cheers, Richard. A lot to take in there. You were right. Was a rattle through, but yeah, there are a couple of questions actually. One from Anna, which was saying, does the plan? No, this is maybe a bit more of a recent thing, but does the London plan, take into account reductions in demand for office space caused by working from home, to your knowledge?
Well, no, because the London plan, really, the draft consultations all happened pre-COVID, but they do recognise that there needs to be sort of more WeWork type space, so lots more smaller cellular enterprise zones really that allow small startups R&D, research, and support social enterprise, charities, small-scale organisations, and so on.
Okay. And then there was a final question from Rob that says, what counts as a major development in residential and non-residential kind of developments? Are there any LCA requirements for non-major development?
The sustainable infrastructure, lean, clean, green, hasn't fundamentally changed. So that still stays. We still have to make that 10% reduction through the fabric first approach. But when I was reviewing the latest plan, my understanding was that a major development is over 50 units.
Okay. Hopefully that answered your your question there, Rob. Any last minute questions? We're bang on 11 o'clock, so we've taken up an hour of your time, which I thank you for. So I'll give you last kind of 30 seconds to get your questions in. I'll just tell you about next week's webinar. We were going to have Duncan Baker-Brown, and that's been pushed out a bit. He's unable to make that one. So I'm going to give you guys an update on, it'll be quite a short and sweet webinar next week. It's going to be an update on the LETI and REBA 2030 Climate Challenge kind of carbon alignment documents, which have recently come out. Great to see kind of a huge amount more thought going into that and a lot more agreement between the kind of the main parties involved there. So I'm going to give you a short précis of that. So do sign up for next week's webinar as well. I don't think we've got any questions. Thanks, folks. Great to have you with us again. We'll put this recording up on YouTube. We'll share with you the presentation as soon as we can do. Thank you for your time. Take care and see you next week. Bye-bye.